my vision was the first thing to go. It felt snowy. It felt like TV staticky almost. But I could still see. So it was strange. It would get really bad in sunlight, or fluorescent lights was just like, oh, that was just triggering. And then the existential thoughts just began. And they were probably the harder part for me personally than the physical feelings. I'm going crazy. I can't recognize my boyfriend. I can't recognize my mom and dad. I can't connect with anybody anymore. My voice in my own head was so loud. I actually quit work for a while. I quit university. I would go home to my mom and dad's house, which was an hour away in the country, and I would just like bawl my eyes out. Everything was just really internal and really personified. And it was almost like I was hyper fixated on everything I used to not worry about.
Hey everyone, I'm Sean O'Connor, author of the Depersonalization Manual, and today I'm speaking with Emma Bowe from Brisbane in Australia. Emma is a counsellor, musician, and social media influencer. She is the creator of The Life Clinic, a counselling and psychology clinic based on the Sunshine Coast. Emma has a massive TikTok following of over 40,000 followers, where she has gained a positive reputation through openly discussing mental health challenges in difficult to treat areas such as emetophobia, ADHD, and depersonalization and derealization disorder. As she says on her website, quote, I had anxiety ever since I can remember that led to emetophobia, which led to more anxiety, which led to OCD and DPDR. Enter the present day. I'm feeling happier, healthier, and stronger than ever. And with my degree in clinical counseling, I have a passion for helping others, end quote. I first spoke to Emma back in 2020 when she was struggling badly with chronic depersonalization and derealization. It was a difficult time for her, but thankfully she has since made a complete recovery and now uses that experience as a resource for helping others in her professional life. And Emma is with us today to talk about her experience with and recovery from DPDR. Emma, you're very welcome to the channel. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited. I can't believe it's been that long. Like it just flew by in some ways.
It's wild, isn't it? And it's wild to think that like COVID happened in the meantime, like the world turned upside down at that time as well.
Goodness, I can't believe it. Like, I think it was not long after we chatted, it just all turned upside down. And
I think
that
so.
was kind of an interesting part of my DPDR journey as well, having that happen and not being able to go out and socialize, even though it was probably the best thing for me. But we got there. It shows that you can do it.
Certainly. And something that I would have experienced as well in people I spoke to, that's like, you know, the experience of COVID and kind of lockdown really kind of like kind of compounded on people's anxieties. But you know, regardless of the circumstances, we can always push through it. So Emma, it's great to have you on the channel. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I feel like you summed it up. I felt embarrassed hearing all those things about myself. But yeah, I'm a clinical counselor in Australia. And I remember you saying to me in our session together when I got DPDR, you said, oh, you will go on to help people with this, Emma. And I was at the time, I was like, no way, like I can't. And I'd already started my counseling degree at that point. So that was interesting, but I just thought I'll never be able to talk about DPDR. And it ended up being one of the main things I've talked about now on my TikTok, and something that I've connected with lots of people around. And yeah, that's kind of how I've ended up here, I guess.
So Emma, can you tell us a little bit more about your experience with DPDR and just kind of something I mentioned in the introduction, but your experience with anxiety growing up and how that affected you?
Yeah, so DPDR, I don't think it came out of nowhere, even though at the time I felt like it did. But I have probably had anxiety tendencies since I was born. I don't know even where it started, how it started, but I was always a bit of an anxious kid growing up. I think a lot of people will understand that when they watch this and maybe see something in themselves in that manner. I didn't really recognize it though. It was just that like simmering anxiety stuff. I think I had a tendency towards OCD thoughts, interestingly enough. And I'd even do it with music. So I'm a musician as well. And I would, you know, obsess over playing my violin and get loops stuck in my mind, little signs and signals that obviously I'm a little bit predispositioned, I guess, to that sort of thinking. And then later on, it turned into something called emetophobia. So that is a fear of throwing up. And to a lot of people, they'll be like, what is that? Like, why does that matter? Let's just like an every now and again thing, get drunk, throw up, whatever. But for me, it was huge. It was like this massive phobia. I would avoid going out places. I didn't want to go to school anymore. I would avoid eating tons of different foods. So it kind of turned a little bit into an eating disorder as well for me. So you can kind of see how all these anxieties were adding up. And then basically I started having panic attacks when I got to about 18 years old. And I had a traumatic experience, and then DPDR hit me. So I had it for 2 years, and I didn't know anything about the DP manual or there was no help for it. I was just like out there in the world, 2 years with DPDR. I went to therapists and they were pretty useless, honestly. So that was really, really hard. And I kind of overcame it myself in those 2 years. So my other half, he's a clinical psychologist. So that was a help for sure, getting on top of it and learning about anxiety and things like that. But I guess I just went back into life and didn't really still know the skills or what DPDR was properly. And then again, just before COVID hit, I was in the middle of exams. I was doing a psychology degree. And then I changed into counseling not long after, but it just hit me again. And I knew it was like that out of body experience. And it had just started. And this was again 2020. And I probably had it for a year and I was just melting down. Like I just felt so scared, so out of it. And funnily enough, the other anxieties I had actually lowered because I wasn't thinking about them as much. Right. And it was just DPDR on my mind 24/7. And I'm sure, again, people watching this will have maybe experienced the same thing. And I thought, oh, well, I don't have anxiety anymore. I just have depersonalization. And it's funny how we make up these things. And I hear clients say the same thing to me, like, I'm not an anxious person. I'm not having panic attacks. But you can have this simmering anxiety that is sitting there 99% of the time. When you've got DPDR, you've got anxiety, in my opinion. So I don't know about your opinion, but that's how I felt. And then I found your book because, again, I'm a lot older than I maybe seem. And I was getting towards 30 at that point when the next lot of DPDR hit me, and I was able to find you. And I don't think there's actually a text like it. Like I bought all the other ones on Amazon and things like that. And, there's good things in those books, but yours is very specific and it's got all the right things in it. So then I did a session with you and then it started to ease, and then gradually it just kind of faded away. And then that's led me here. So it was probably 4 years all up that I've had the experience of DPDR. The first time was worse because there was just no support back in 2008 for DPDR. Like I went to a therapist at that time and I went to this guy and he's like, oh, so what's DPDR? Like, it sounds pretty weird. And I was like, yeah, it's weird. Like, and he's like, is it like jet lag? And I was like, kind of, but like you're like way worse and you're stuck in it like all the time. And he's like, okay, what I want you to do, Emma, is imagine that your DPDR is a mirror. And I was like, okay. And he's like, I want you to visualize yourself smashing the mirror and the DPDR will go away. And I was like, what the? Like, it did not go away. So that's the kind of therapy that was around back then. And that's why I'm so passionate about talking about DPDR, because even today, there's still not a lot of knowledge around the condition and how debilitating it is. Like I was bedridden. I wasn't eating. Like I thought I was going to die. Like it was horrendous. And it's not really written in the DSM-5. Like they kind of gloss over it, but I don't know, that I just still feel like there's just not enough awareness around depersonalization and derealization. And I had both for sure. And yeah, that's just my feelings on it, of course, but I guess that's why we're here today. trying to talk about it and raise awareness.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm very interested in particular to kind of see how your how your experience of kind of working in kind of in help and in help in counseling and therapy and such, you will have like the insider track on how, or the inside track on how awareness of it kind of changes over time. So from, I mean, in my perspective, I'm definitely speaking to people more these days when who they tell me when they spoke to their doctor or their therapist and they describe what they're experiencing, the doctor says that's called depersonalization. So I mean, it's not super common, but it's much more common than it was.
I'm
And
getting that.
and when you find that, just kind of having a name for it takes so much of the kind of pressure off it, and you can start to kind of like reallocate all of that mental bandwidth that you've been spending on trying to figure it out onto kind of the recovery process. You can do that much more quickly. But like back in 2005 when I developed it, I mean, nobody knew about it. Like I mean, I'm fairly sure I could have spoken to like every professional in Ireland, and I'd been shocked if any of them had known about it. So it's great to see from my perspective that like the awareness of it is changing. But from your perspective as well, actually working in the field of mental health must be particularly interesting. Emma, I'm quite curious about the emetophobia, and how that may have been kind of like one of the kind of sparks that kind of set the anxiety in place. If you don't mind me asking, was there like a particular event that kind of set that off, or was it something you saw an image like, or something in a film, or where do you know where that came from?
Yeah, I mean, it's different for everybody, but my mum was quite sick when I was little. So I guess I can't go into the full detail of it, but she was quite unwell. And I think I was around 6. So it was quite a formative age for my brain. And I suspect that's where I picked it up from. And yeah, ever since I was about 6, I was just worried about this event all the time. And I'd made it so big in my mind that it was ruling everything. And I'm sure it would have something to do again with that. I could see the repetitive thought patterns of that, and then that going into the DPDR, and that going into, all those things. But then it was only last year, actually, I was diagnosed with ADHD. And that just added a whole nother, I guess, thing to like, oh, DPDR, like they say people have 70,000 thoughts a day, give or take. And I swear I could have like 140,000 thoughts a day. So having DPDR thoughts and trying to get rid of that with ADHD, that was interesting. And it wasn't really until I addressed the ADHD and then the emetophobia, then the anxiety, that my DPDR really went away. So it was interesting. And I think that's a big part sometimes of recovery, is not just your DPDR, but knowing that there can be other little factors like kind of going into it. I think you can get rid of DPDR regardless of what else is going on, but it does help to know, you know what I mean? That those stresses that are building under the surface, I suppose.
Yeah. It's interesting what you said as well about the that you weren't as focused on the other anxieties when the DPDR came along. And
That's strange. Yeah.
yeah, but this is and it but it's a very kind of distinct psychological phenomenon, but it's something I absolutely encountered as well, was that like it's like, and it even kind of happens like within the condition. So like if you may become kind of completely focused on DP and DR and less focused on other sources of anxiety, and then the DPDR completely takes up your focus. But then within the DPDR, you may become completely focused on a specific symptom. So you might become focused on the visual thing, for example, and you might become obsessed with that for like a month and like constantly researching it, getting your eyes tested, all the rest of it. And this is, I mean, something I went through, like I experienced that. And then like the following month, I would start to think that I was losing my memory because I couldn't remember what I had for breakfast 4 days ago or something. And I would start to panic. Oh, I've got dementia. I've got some horrific disease of the brain. And I become absolutely focused on that. And and like, not that the visual stuff would stop, but I would just disregard it because now this is the main emergency. So it's like what you focus on takes up all of your kind of your mental space. And what it feels like when you're going through it is that you're just kind of playing whack-a-mole with these symptoms. You're just, okay, well, I tried the visual thing, I think that's okay, but now there's the memory thing, and okay, now there's the memory thing, but now there's these existential thoughts, and it feels like the condition is like this kind of amorphous blob and it's constantly changing. But what you realize during recovery is that it wasn't changing. It was actually quite static. But what was changing was what you were focusing on. And that can happen within the condition in terms of the symptoms and in terms of the condition itself taking over from the importance that you ascribe to other sources of anxiety. And something I always kind of say to people as well is that, like, when I had DPDR, I remember thinking to myself, like, of all the anxiety-based conditions I could have gotten, I got this one. Like, what?
Yeah, I thought that.
Yeah, like, why couldn't I have gotten claustrophobia? I could manage claustrophobia, But the thing is that, like, but the thing is that for somebody with chronic claustrophobia, it's not like their whole day is fantastic until the 30 seconds that they're in the elevator. It's the first thing that they think about when they wake up in the morning and the last thing they think about at night. And they're catastrophizing about what happens if I can't open the door of my car, if the subway is too busy, if the cubicle in the toilet locks and I can't get out, constantly for catastrophizing. And so for that person, the fear of chronic claustrophobia takes up just as much space in their kind of field of awareness or field of thought as DPDR does for somebody who's going through that. But of course, it's very hard to keep a sense of perspective when you're going through it, because it's just alarm bells, panic all the time,
And you're just so heightened. And I have a theory, and this is a bit out there, but it kind of comes from the evolutionary psychology theory of the fight or flight. So this is for me anyway, and a lot of clients I meet up with seem to have the same story of having panic and not being able to perform the fight or flight mechanism. So, for instance, when we're in fight or flight, we want to run from the tiger, but we never usually run when we're panicking, because if we're in a board meeting, it's kind of weird to stand up and start running around the room, right? So,
unless it's for Nike or Adidas or something like.
Yeah, right. So again, we sit there and we kind of cop it. And we have these panic attacks, and they're really internal, but our ancestors probably didn't do that. They probably ran. So they finished the fight flight cycle, they kind of call it. And then I think if you don't finish the fight flight cycle, you kind of end up in that freeze response. And I think DPDR, this is again just my theory, there's no science behind it, but it seems that that's like part of that freeze response. And part of that, and then going into those obsessive thoughts. And then I think it's that whole, like, just stay low, let the brain's trying to, like, chill you out, make you kind of look dead, but then keeping those thoughts going. So you're like, where's the tiger? Is he there? Is he not there? So interesting.
It's so fascinating.
It's fascinating now, but it wasn't when I was in it.
When I was in it, it was the opposite of fascinating.
It was awful, right? Like, it's still hands down the worst thing I've experienced some other stuff that some people would say that's traumatic, like a lot of us have, but I still think DPDR is one of the scariest things I've for sure ever been through.
I remember thinking, I said this in other interviews, but like, I remember thinking I didn't know it was possible for a human being to feel this level of fear, because it was like, I mean, like, the worst horror film I've ever seen was like a day with playing with kittens compared to DPDR. It was just like constant, like, just like existential terror, and like and every time one of these thoughts would hit me, it felt like a building fell on top of me, and just like whack, like, over and over and over, when you're trying to just like talk to your parents or make toast, like, and it's just No, now you're
Oh,
thinking about the size of the universe, and you can't think about anything else for the next 12 hours, like,
it's just
um
awful. My dogs used to set me off something fierce. I don't know why. I just had this dog thing, and like I have two little pugs, and if I looked at their eyes, I was gone for like the day. I was like, they're just not real. Like it just would be, oh, and the panic, it would just go like all through your system. Like
yeah.
it's awful. Yeah. So
um
I get it. It's just weird. It's horrible.
the dog thing is interesting because it's something that I hear about like often enough, because it's like people say, well, like I look at my dog and I'd be just like, what is it? Like, what
What is a
what what
dog?
what is a dog?
Yeah.
And I experienced that, and my one in particular was like, I looked at the dogs, or the dog, and I would think to myself, like, what is the dog's consciousness like?
Me too.
How
Yes.
is
That
the
was the
dog
thing behind
experiencing
it.
reality? And that
Yeah.
would set me
Yeah.
off for hours, like
That's the thing.
terror, like,
Yeah.
yeah.
And that's the thing.
um
I think DPDR, we can all kind of, I can even conjure up a bit of DPDR if I really sat here and I was like, I'm just gonna focus on my hands, or the fact I can only see my body and not my head. I don't know if you've thought of that one, but I have. So like I'm like, whoa, that's weird. I can't see my own face. But and that can kind of bring up that DPDR feeling, but I no longer like obsess over it. And it just the thought, it's just a thought now, and it was always thoughts. It was just that I like assigned panic to the thought at the time. So it's really
exactly,
interesting.
exactly. And I mean, and also, like, I mean, the feelings of DPDR are like the most common thing in the world. Like
Totally.
75% of people will go through this at some point in their lives. 75%. If you go through life without experiencing this, you're in a minority. Like,
Yeah.
people experience these feelings like briefly, in the same way that people experience heart palpitations from time to time and muscle tension. These are
Totally.
they're symptoms of stress and anxiety, but it's just when they're focused on as and panicking that this is a problem and something is terribly wrong. That's when that cycle starts. It's interesting what you say, Emma, about the freeze response. There was I don't know if you saw it, but I interviewed a mental health nurse named Paul Molyneux on the channel. This was a couple of months ago, and Paul had gone through. He's with the NHS in the UK, but Paul had gone through DPDR himself as well, and he's like just so knowledgeable about it. But Paul did a podcast interview recently that I listened to. He talked about the freeze response as well. It's really interesting. And what you say as well about like feeling like you need to run but you can't run, and
Yes.
it's like when you're because the reason that these feelings happen are supposed to be because of external threats. It's supposed to be because you're getting chased by a wild animal, or you're being hurt, or violence is happening, or something is happening. But if that happens when you're in the board meeting, or you're writing an email, or having dinner with your parents or something, then then that fear becomes internalized. It's like I kind of say to people often is like nobody ever, like, the scariest thing about a panic attack is that it appears to be happening for no reason. Like, I'm having a
Yes.
panic attack, but I'm like watching Netflix with my partner.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why is this happening? But nobody ever like got home from being chased by a grizzly bear and said, I had the worst panic attack while that grizzly bear was chasing me. Like, I felt really tense.
Totally.
I felt quite tense, like, you know,
Imagine. Yeah. Yeah.
and you
Totally.
might and it might be the exact same symptoms you're experiencing, but because there is an external threat to which you can ascribe, or that you can ascribe to it, you don't think about it further, and you don't internalize it and say, but why was I feeling that? Why was I feeling that? Why is this disconnection there?
Absolutely.
And you can just let it go, and in the same sense, your muscles relax, your heart rate gets back to normal. um
Yeah.
but but it's having the awareness of it then kind of going forward that prevents it from prevents it from happening again.
Absolutely. And I think just on the end of that is looking at panic, and I still get panic attacks occasionally, but I now normalize them because I find them as normal, and I tell clients this all the time. as anything else that the body does, like sneezing, like having a cold, like these things, a panic attack will pass. You might have, it's all it is heightened adrenaline and heightened cortisol. It is never dangerous. We can go through marathons as human beings and go to space and do all these incredible things. Like a little bit of adrenaline and excess cortisol is just going to go through our body and it's just going to leave. And once I kind of realized that, I was like, hang on, panic is not dangerous. And the DPDR thoughts, again, when I went through that, I was like, oh, if I have them, they're not dangerous. And we start to like, I'll just move my mind onto something else, or I'll walk around or do something quite physical would help me in those moments. And I think that's really important. And it might, again, link to that fight, flight, freeze response and not letting myself go into freeze by just having a walk or doing something and just allowing the adrenaline, cortisol to just leave my body naturally.
Yeah, absolutely. And I find a good way to think about it as well is that, like, you know, I mean, when I was recovering and I would still from time to time, I mean, I never had like the explosive, like, end of the world panic attacks that I had at the start of when I got to when I had no idea what was going on. Like, but if I ever kind of felt some panic towards when I was recovering, I would just say to myself, like, you just take the kind of stoic point of view and say, okay, like, what's the worst case scenario here? Okay, it's that you're at the cinema. What's the worst thing that can happen? The worst thing that can happen is you have a panic attack. If you have a panic attack, if you have a panic attack, what do? Okay, I get up, I go to the bathroom, I sit in the bathroom, I catch my breath, I maybe splash some water in my face, I check my phone for a minute or two, and then I go back in and watch the rest of the film. And that's the worst thing that can happen. And also, I've been through panic attacks before. So, like, and I survived those, at a time when I didn't know what a panic attack was, and it was way more frightening than it is now. So it's, but it's kind of like just consciously remembering that when the panic starts, because the panic, as we were saying earlier, it just tends to kind of occupy your entire kind of thought space, but just kind of just actively saying, like, you know, look, what's the worst thing that can happen? Basically, the worst thing that can happen, I can handle it. The best thing that can happen is I'll just enjoy the film. I can definitely handle that, and everything in between, I can handle all of that too. So, mathematically speaking, I can handle this. I'd be grand. So I would kind of refer to that if I ever felt anxiety or that moments of panic, like, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a stigma around panic, but something I've realized, and I really normalize this with my clients, is I still get panic from time to time. I see pilots, I see police officers, I've seen a couple of like celebrities now or whatever. Like, you know, I can never go into who any of these people are, but it is so normal to get panic. Like, I think that's the biggest thing, is like, if I've got DPDR, or which is just a symptom of anxiety, if I've got any of these things, then I'm broken, or there's something really wrong with me, or I think it's just normalizing that. And it was actually another Irish author called Barry McDonough. Have you heard of him by any chance?
I have indeed. Yeah.
Their book. Yes, because he had DPDR as well, he said in his book. And it was just so interesting, reading his theory on panic. And if anyone is struggling, I think, with panic alone, that is just such a great resource. And the app as well.
Excellent. And something that somebody mentioned to me on a recent interview was saying, like, she was training to be a therapist, and she felt that when she developed anxiety, she worried that the fact that she had kind of gone through anxiety would kind of render her like unable to do this, because this kind of idea that, well, a therapist needs to kind of, you know, have like not have kind of experienced these things in order to judge them practically. And then when she kind of, you know, as she recovered, she thought, oh no, this is only going to help. Like, this is only going to strengthen my ability to communicate with people and to relate to people.
Spot on.
Yeah,
yes,
absolutely.
Totally.
Yeah,
I had
yeah.
that fear as well for a little while. And I think I expressed that in our session 3 years ago. I was like, I don't know, like I think I said I'm doing counseling or psychology at the time. And I was like, I don't know if I'll, be okay for this. And you were like, sure you will. And I was like, oh yeah, like it's fine. And it's weird because it goes into other things in your life. Like, I know this sounds so cliche, but DPDR is weirdly one of the best things that ever happened to me. And if somebody's listening to this and they've got DPDR right now, I understand that they are probably just rolling their eyes, going, like, stop it. Like, because when I heard people say that, I was like, get out of town. Like, there's no way. But I actually genuinely changed so many things around my habits, my thoughts, how to deal with other thought patterns that again linked to the DPDR. Like, it was so good, and now I can share that with other people and clients, and I think they like the lived in experience.
Mm.
Yeah,
Oh,
I can
absolutely.
relate.
Absolutely. I mean, and it is the polar opposite to, like, speaking to somebody and them saying, like, well, that sounds weird, to
Right,
have,
totally.
yeah, to have someone say, I know what that is. Like, I
Yeah,
recognize that, and it's not pleasant, but it's not going to hurt you. Um,
absolutely.
and so just kind of backtracking a little bit, Emma, in terms of your own experience, when the DPDR started, so what kind of symptoms were you experiencing? Can you tell us a bit more about those?
Of course. So both times was exactly the same. So
Mm.
it started off, I didn't want to admit to myself it was DPDR, especially the second time. I was like, no way, it's brain fog. And I tried to label it as brain fog for about 2 weeks. And I had to stop because I knew it wasn't brain fog. It was just, I felt like my vision was the first thing to go. It felt snowy. It felt like TV staticky almost. But I could still see. So it was strange. It would get really bad in sunlight, or fluorescent lights was just like, oh, that was just triggering. And it was, yeah, it kind of started like that. And then the existential thoughts just began. And they were probably the harder part for me personally than the physical feelings. So I was like, again, without triggering anyone, I probably should put a trigger warning here, but they were thoughts like, am I, going to heaven, hell? Am I dead? Am I in a coma? Have I got schizophrenia? I'm going crazy. I can't recognize my boyfriend. I can't recognize my mom and dad. I can't connect with anybody anymore. My voice in my own head was so loud. That was a really massive symptom for me for ages. I could, like, almost, my thoughts sounded louder than they ever had before. And I was like, people are going to be able to tell that I've got this. And I used to have thoughts like, I'd have a conversation with someone. I was like, am I blinking the right way? And I'd be like, make sure you blink, Emma. Like, all these
Yeah,
strange,
yeah,
right? Like, strange thoughts. And like, everything was just really internal and really personified. And it was almost like I was hyper fixated on everything I used to not worry about, essentially. Like, this connection to my body that was too connected, but then this disconnection from my body that was too disconnected. It was just bizarre. And I was tired all the time. And I actually quit work for a while. I quit university. I would go home to my mom and dad's house, which was an hour away in the country, and I would just, like, bawl my eyes out, like, every night. And I ended up sleeping in my parents' bedroom on their floor at like 30 years old. Yeah, I feel, that makes me sad thinking back on that. I mean, I only had to do that for a couple of weeks, but that's how scary it was. Like, I just was just completely disconnected. I couldn't eat for like days on end. There's so many things that encompassed, and it was just like complete OCD. Like, I could not seem to think about anything else but existential thoughts and depersonalization thoughts. So that was kind of the worst of it, I'd say. And then it got better once I started learning and doing the right things. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, it's a tough experience, Emma. And I can relate to all of that. Uh, uh, at 20, for me, it was at 25 years old. Stopping everything, like, and things were going good. I was finished college. I was out in the world. Um, I was in a relationship. I was about to start my career in film. I hoped I was a full-time musician at the time, so that was kind of paying my way for progress.
Same.
And then
Yes.
yeah, and then
I quit gigs, like I couldn't play shows and I
oh
was
my
doing
god.
well at that time. So that was just, I felt crazy for that, you know? Yeah.
The gigs thing was like, I mean, I remember like thinking, I mean, for me at that stage, for me, the idea of like getting on stage and playing the guitar and singing, which is what I had been doing like for years to pay the bills. Like the idea of doing that was like going to Mars. Like I could like
Yeah.
there was I couldn't leave the house, like not to mind like bring gear down to a bar, be sociable, get set up,
Yeah.
sing for 2 hours. Are you kidding me?
I know.
Nah.
Yeah. I
I
did do
couldn't
a
do
gig
it.
depersonalized. I had to because it was a festival and I was booked and it
Wow.
was booked for months and it was a big one in Australia. And I was like, it was the weirdest thing. Like, and again, it was one of those moments I was like, I know Sean needs me to do this. I know that sounds bizarre, doesn't it? And I was just like, I have to keep going. And thank goodness I did. But, you know, it was hard. And that's the start of that DPDR thing, I think, is doing it despite it feeling like shit. Excuse my language. Despite it feeling awful is just like, it will feel awful for a while, to be honest. I've hardly met anyone who was like, oh, yay, I'm fixed. Like, you just got to push and push and push.
Yeah, absolutely. You're because you're essentially replacing one habit with another habit. And when you do that, it's not flicking a light switch. You have to
Oh,
give your body and brain the parameters to follow, and then they start to pick it up. The same thing if you change a diet, the same thing if you start a new regime at the gym. Like you
quit
make
smoking. Yeah.
yeah, quit smoking. Yeah. You make the changes, and then you give yourself the time and the space for that new habit to take precedence over the other. But what happens, and what makes that particularly frustrating with anxiety DP, especially at the start, is that because it's so based on compulsive checking, what we do is it's we wake up in the morning and we go, is it there? Is it
Oh,
there?
yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So from
100%.
yeah, for me, I'd wake up in the morning and I'd have 5 seconds of not thinking about it because and then I remember, oh, I have this thing, and I check on it, and then that would cause the feeling, of course. And then I would lie in bed for 20 minutes thinking, how am I going to get through the next 24 hours of this nonsense? Like, and just feeling demoralized. But it's that thing of like, it's that idea of checking on it to see if it's on or off, which prevents us from giving us the time and the space for a habitual change to occur. Which I mean, of course, it takes a little bit of time, but that's perfectly okay. The symptoms that you mentioned, Emma, as well. I mean, and as I was saying, like for me, like at 25 years old, like having, like it was like I said this in a recent interview, but it was like a rug had been yanked out from under me that I didn't know was there, and now
Yes.
and now I'm lying on the ground going like, and nobody can help me. I can't help me, and now I just have to go home and live with my parents, and
Yeah.
and and I've no idea how long this is going to last. And researching it became my full-time job.
Oh,
I stopped being a musician and became a full-time DPDR
yes.
researcher within 48 hours. Like, yeah.
Hey, yeah, I feel you. And that gets you nowhere. That's the thing I learned. Like it just, and that was a habit in itself that became almost like an addiction for me to be like on Reddit or on, all these different sources looking for this magic button or pill or whatever you want to call it to get rid of DPDR. And it doesn't exist. It just keeps you in the loop of checking for symptoms, thinking about DPDR, thinking about I need to Google it, and then you see those comments. Oh, You know, you're like there and you're like, I feel a little bit better today. I'm going to go and look up DPDR on Reddit, a positive story, because I've saved one. And then you go in there and then there's this person and they're like, I've had it for 20 years. You're not going to get rid of it. And you're like, bro, and then it spirals and I'm like, I'm going to have it for 20 years. I'm going to have it for life. Like it just starts, oh, it's awful. And I've seen that person in the clinic now. I'm going to be completely honest. I've seen that person, and it's no disrespect, but often they will write in the forums, but they're not doing all the right things for their recovery. They're not quitting looking at Reddit. They're not exercising each day or going out or pushing themselves past those barriers that do feel awful at first. It's not nice. Like, it's not nice making yourself talk to people when you have DPDR, but it gets easier, you know. Sorry, that went on a bit of a tangent there, but I'm so passionate about that.
Not at all. And it's something I can absolutely relate to. And like when I was at the stage where I was really seeing results, and my life was back on track and things were going well, but the anxiety wasn't completely gone and the DPDR wasn't completely gone yet. But even at that stage, I still found myself researching it, and I still had I mean, less than I had done before, but I'd still be just like something would just kind of take my fancy, like like what if I tried this and this and this, and try those things together? Maybe that'll speed up my recovery, you know. And this idea that like I can, you know, I'm making progress. Okay, now what can I do to make that happen faster? But what you realize as you recover is that what you want to do is train yourself away from asking those questions. And if you do ask those questions, train yourself away from indulging in them, from acting on them. I mean, I had I had a folder in my web browser of recovery stories on Reddit and like kind of, it was many kind of DP forums at that time. I can't even remember being on Reddit at that time. But anyways, this is 2005, 2007. But like I would read through those over and over again, and then I'd feel better for a while. But then like inevitably, like that evening or the next day, I'd feel worse. And I wonder why I felt worse. And the reason was because at a time when I didn't need to be thinking about anxiety or DP anymore, I was just reminding myself of it over and over again. But with the best of intentions, but it's just through kind of trial and error, we figure out, okay, I really, really want to answer this question that I think, well, if I combine eating muesli in the morning with a run at 3:00 in the afternoon and watching Jurassic Park at 7, maybe that'll fit, you know. Has anybody else tried that? I'll give that a go. And it's just saying, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to take the dog for a walk instead, and just interrupting that thought and focusing away from it. But because at some point, once you have the information and you know what you need to do, it just becomes kind of like scratching an itch. It's as far as I know, it's very similar with kind of all anxiety-based conditions. You do have to kind of take your attention away from it to give yourself the time and space to let that habit go.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I get this question a lot. They're like, you know, clients are like, oh, do I just distract myself all the time? And yeah, kind of. But I think I like to call it re-engaging. So I'm like, no,
yes.
like make sure you re-engage. And I think that word means more like it encompasses your values and who you are as a human, and writing those things down and being like, hang on, these are the things I want to focus on. Like, I don't know about you, but that was something, getting into like flow state activities. Like, you know, it's not just about going on TikTok all the time and being like, I'm distracted, or like white knuckling your way into distraction. Like, I'm going to do HIIT 24/7. I'm going to go to the gym 8 hours a day. Like, that's not it. It's like re-engaging in life into the things that light you up and make you feel like you enter that flow state. That was big for me.
Yeah.
And you definitely went into that in your book. Yeah.
Yeah. And I've been hearing that word, hearing and using that word a lot more recently myself, and I love it. I think like re-engaging is, because I think with this distraction, even though like it is, I mean, it is technically correct and it is what we should be
Yeah.
doing, but I think it kind of has, there's a kind of a negative connotation to it. So it's like, well, you know, I was trying to read a book, but I kept getting distracted by music happening next door. And it feels like there's a negative connotation to it that I'm just trying to kind of almost kind of flick my attention or over here away from the anxiety. But re-engagement definitely suggests a more kind of complete refocusing of attention onto something else, and as you mentioned, kind of engaging in flow state. I mean, I do think you can do that with kind of smaller things in especially in situations where like you have like a couple of minutes free or something. For me, I used to always
Oh yeah.
walk around with like a Nintendo DS. So if I was waiting 5 minutes for the bus, I would just like play the Nintendo instead of like, you know, standing there in silence, like, you know. But
Yes.
I was able to, you know, distract and engage myself using something as simple as that, like, you know.
Love
Um
it.
and a few of the symptoms you mentioned as well, Emma, um the you know, the kind of hyper awareness of your own voice
Oh yeah.
and finding it difficult to speak to people as well. It's so common, and the hyper awareness of things like blinking or swallowing,
Oh,
things like that are extremely common. And it feel at the time when you're going through it, it just feels so, it feels so overwhelming, and just like you just can't like stay keep your concentration on a single thing because you're constantly focused on yourself. But the reason that that's happening is because with heightened states of anxiety and or fight or flight, you are much more aware of what's happening in your physical state and in
yes.
your environment. Because because you know, this is, it's you know, it's happening for a hypothetical situation in which you are being physically attacked. So of course you're going to have like a hyper awareness of like your physical state and your body. But if there is no
Yeah.
physical threat happening around you, then you're going to be hyper aware of your thoughts, of sounds happening, you know.
Oh,
So
absolutely.
so your voice is going to sound louder. It's so fascinating that like each one of these symptoms has the simplest, most logical explanation for it. But when we're going through it and we don't have that kind of narrative that allows us to understand it, it just feels like this obstacle course of the most, it just feels like you're in a sci-fi novel, just all these bizarre symptoms happening at the same time.
Yes.
Um, and even your own voice feels too
Oh yeah.
loud.
Absolutely. And I did
Yeah.
like a lot of checking behaviors around that. And I don't know if your
Mm,
clients do some of that, but I was doing things like reassurance seeking. So I know a lot of people with OCD do reassurance seeking. So I was constantly asking my partner, does everything look okay to you? Does the room look normal to you? And I used to like, I know this is kind of embarrassing, but he used to have a piercing. So I'd like go and check his ear and I'd be like, just to make sure it was him, like
right.
little things. And I was like, hey, what's my middle name? Can you just tell me? Like all these like funny little OCD things would pop up around the DPDR. And that was something I also had to quit, is the reassurance seeking, because I was asking like anyone who I was, you know, close to, I was like, is this normal? Is that normal? Does the house look strange? Does the room look weird to you? Like,
Yeah.
so it's interesting. It infiltrates in so many different ways. And it was hard to quit that. That
Oh
was a
yeah,
safety behavior for sure.
for sure. And I think, and it's very much connected to the constant research, because I think at a certain point it kind of stops. Like once you understand what the condition is, then it does kind of just turn into checking behaviors, because what you do is like you'll feel a specific symptom or a combination of two or three symptoms, and you'll say like, is this definitely DPDR? So then you'll go onto the
Yes.
forums and you okay,
Yeah.
and you look through posting, does anybody feel this exact same thing? And the way I thought about it when I recovered was Like what was I looking for at that time? And I realized that like what I thought I was looking for was somebody who had the exact same story as me, who at like 25 had like a really bad weed experience, developed DPDR, and after a panic attack a week or two later, and experienced the same symptoms. And if I could find that person and see that they had recovered, I'd know. And I could draw a line under it and say, okay, that guy recovered, I know I can recover, and I can stop researching. What I
Yeah.
realized as I recovered was like, if I had found that person, who it wouldn't exist, of course, but if I, hypothetically speaking, if I'd found that person, what would I have done? Would I have like closed the laptop and stopped researching? I would, yeah. I would have contacted them. That would have been the
Yep.
start of another rabbit hole. Then it would have freaked me out. That I would have been, Jesus, but like,
Yep.
is this like a doppelganger? Is this like a different? It's just,
Yeah.
it's just constant questions upon questions upon questions. And I had to train myself away from indulging that tendency to check or to seek reassurance that the symptoms that I experienced on that day were experienced by somebody else. It was the
Yeah.
checking
Yeah.
that was the issue. Yeah. Yeah.
Totally. It's such a big part of the DPDR cycle, and something I noticed. And the other one that I've seen a lot, it didn't really happen to me, but with clients, is they join groups. Like they'll have a Facebook group of like 3 friends with DPDR. And even though I understand it, the logical side in me is like, of course you would seek that
Yeah.
support. Like I get it. Like I know how hard it is, and you just look for that. But in the long term, I don't think it's great, because I think it's a safety behavior in itself, and it's reassurance seeking. And then you're all doing it, and you're all keeping your minds on DPDR. And you know that when you open Facebook, what's your mind going to go to? That group. Like it just
Yeah.
keeps you in the loop. So I know, but I also say all these things with complete understanding
Mm.
of how hard it is. And I
Oh,
get why it happens.
oh my goodness, absolutely. I mean, when I see people doing this or people describing it to me, all I can think of is like, I, I wish somebody had this conversation with me when I was 25, 26 years old, because
Yeah.
I know exactly why you're doing this and why that compulsion is there. The Facebook thing is really it's really interesting because like, and it's a great example because I mean, it was like for me on the forums back in the day, I was like always communicating with people, talking about it, comparing and contrasting symptoms. Um, and it and to a certain point, it is helpful, especially at the start, where you think, well, there's okay, I can somebody other people have this. I'm not like some sort of medical mystery. There's other people
Yes.
that have this, and they're experiencing the same thing. But where that becomes a problem is after the point where you have all the information you need, and you're at a point where you need to give yourself the time and space to forget about this condition, but you're literally getting notifications on your phone to remind you of it because somebody has posted something in the group, and it's literally a device just reminding you about anxiety and DPDR, again with the very best of intentions, but it just kind of slows recovery. Something you mentioned as well, Emma, about the feelings of tiredness. This was like a major thing for me as well, and it scared me so much because again, 25 years old, and like I would get up late. I would spend the whole day researching DP and DR, do nothing else. I mean, I wasn't exercising. I would just kind of trying to eat some food and then go to bed early. And by the time I went to bed, I was absolutely shattered. I was
Oh
exhausted,
yeah.
like, and then kind of going like, Jesus, like, what's this? I'm 25 years old. I'm a 25-year-old man. I'm supposed to be like ripping to
Time of
like
your
go
life.
down to the gym and
Yeah.
play sports, like, and I can't. And I'm dragging myself out of bed, and I can barely drag myself up the stairs to bed in the evening. And I did nothing all day. That scared me so much. Um, but of course, as you realize as you recover, like having anxiety, especially at that stage, it is exhausting. Because when you're on high alert all day, your body and brain are, your thoughts are moving like super quickly, which in itself is exhausting. You're not eating right. And also when you do sleep, my sleep was constantly disrupted. I would have dreams about anxiety and DP, and I'd wake up.
Oh yeah, me too.
And I just felt so tired all day long, every day. Yeah.
Oh, it's like I've never felt tiredness like that. Like that was just the worst of it. I think it's just that hypervigilance all the time too, like
Yeah.
having to think about DPDR, and like does the room feel normal? Like you're just on like 24/7. And the funny thing is that if I get a touch of DPDR now, and I will say I still get these little touches because it's such a normal experience.
Mm-hmm.
If I ever get it, it's because I am super tired. Like, so it's interesting how it was feeding into, like, I'd stay up on the internet reading about DPDR, not sleeping as much, having then nightmares about DPDR or nightmares, then waking up, but tiredness equals DPDR often. So it's just interesting. Like once I got on top of my sleep cycle and stopped doing all those things, you're less tired, so you're less prone to DPDR. And again, it's not really like that. Just is one part that kind of self goes away. I'm not saying it's everything, but it's one part is the sleep. So
Absolutely.
it's a big part of things, I think.
Yeah. And it's such a great illustration for how, like, the feelings of DPDR themselves, they're not like, in and of themselves, they're not actually frightening, you know, because like take somebody who has, for example, if I flew from Ireland to Australia, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to be jet lagged for minimum a day, right? And
Minimum,
my
yeah.
minimum, right? But I expect that, and I expect the feelings of kind of like kind of dreaminess and kind of like not feeling quite right. But again, it's when you know what's going to happen and you can ascribe a simple reason to it, you don't then start kind of like pointing the anxiety at it and saying, "Oh Jesus, something is wrong. Something. Why am I feeling like this?" And when you don't interpret it like that, you allow it to fade away and stop. People experience this like all the time. It's the most common thing in the world. It's just that when it's interpreted as something dangerous and catastrophic, that's when it turns into a feedback loop with anxiety and keeps it going.
100%. Yeah, I totally agree. It's the fear of it and that feeling, and then you almost get obsessed, and it's on from that moment. But now I get these little feelings and little flutters of it, or I'll even induce it on myself occasionally and go, hands are weird, but I just let it go. Like,
Yeah.
it's because I'm just out of the habit of thinking about it, and I know that that's the habit, and I can see it now. So there's a lot of hope. Like if anyone is watching this and going, well, I don't think that's gonna be me, like I promise it will be. Like
Yeah.
I know it. Like I didn't think I could recover, but you do. And those thoughts just, they don't worry you anymore. They just become like the rest of the 70% or 75% of people. You just have them, and they just go. You're like, oh yeah, cool.
Yeah,
Done.
absolutely. And it's good to remember that, like, having the worry that like, but I can't recover, mine's different, so I can't recover.
Yes.
Nobody ever had an anxiety-based condition and didn't think that.
Oh my
Like,
goodness,
no,
totally.
yeah, like nobody ever like got a diagnosis of agoraphobia from their doctor and said, "Oh, great, nice one, thanks for that."
Totally. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then took a stroll in the park. Everyone's reaction is, okay, but what if I can't recover? But what if mine's different? Even but agoraphobia is like claustrophobia. These conditions they're very common, they're temporary, they're harmless. They are, there's various techniques that you can use to recover. There's like acceptance and commitment, there's exposure therapy, but nobody ever hears that and goes like, oh, nice one. Like, everybody hears that and says, yeah, but mine's different because I had a panic attack on an airplane, mine started because I had a bad weed experience. Mine's different.
Absolutely. I hear that a lot as well. The weed experience. And it's funny because I've smoked weed. I'm not gonna pretend. But I never got DPDR when I did that. And funnily enough, a lot of clients have this regret when they come and see me. They're like, well, Emma, like if I had not have smoked that joint, I would not, like, I shouldn't have done that to myself. I've ruined my life. I'm like, honestly, you cannot tell when DPDR is going to hit you. If you're an anxious person, it's just the anxiety. If it was the weed, it was the weed. If it was a panic attack, it was the panic attack. If it was, a traumatic event, whatever it is, I think it's the same. It's just the same thing. Like, you haven't wrecked your brain. Like, it's, some of us, I think, are just a bit predispositioned potentially to just having that experience, and it's normal.
Absolutely.
That's my views, by the way. I shouldn't say that that's definite or anything like that, but that's just how I've seen 180 people or something who have come through for counseling with DPDR, and I just noticed there's a theme there.
Oh, certainly. And I mean, I mean, when I speak to people who have developed DPDR through a bad weed experience, like what happened to me, and then I'll speak to somebody who developed DPDR because they were doing a presentation at work and they drank 4 cups of coffee that morning, and they, but their description of the symptoms are exactly the same. They may be focusing on different, but the symptoms themselves, as we were saying earlier, are like fairly static. Like they're fairly consistent, But very often when there is weed involved or a drug involved, there's the added worry that I somehow fried a circuit in my brain. I somehow damaged some sort of, I took so much. And it's funny. An interview I did recently, and the guy said, he said, I was worried that I broke my brain with drugs. And I remember when I was 25, I literally said those words to myself. Like those words in that order, I broke my brain with drugs. That's what I thought happened. But what we learned during recovery is that the weed ultimately it's not the most important factor. The most important factor is the panic attack. If you had smoked twice the amount of that weed and enjoyed yourself, the panic attack wouldn't have happened. But that's not to say that like 6 months down the line, you have an argument with your spouse and then that triggers a panic attack. But this idea of kind of like blaming yourself, which I did hardcore for a long time. I was like, why did I do that? Like, why was I so stupid? And then I realized that like the whole blame thing just kind of like, it keeps the anxiety going, and it's giving it too much credit. It's like if the person who's giving the business presentation like spent the rest of that year kicking themselves that they gave a business presentation. It's not about the business presentation. It's about the panic attack. And panic attacks are the most common thing in the world. Like the most common thing in the world. If you go through life without having a panic attack, you need to do the lottery. Like, I mean, panic attacks
you're
are like,
lucky. Yeah.
Oh my God. Like, yeah. So Emma, at what point did you find the term depersonalization? So was this kind of like quite a good bit down the line, or was this kind of did it happen quickly during your research, or when did you find the term depersonalization, derealization?
Yes. So the first time I was 18, and it was probably about a year into it. And that first time I got it actually from trauma. So my high school boyfriend had passed away, and that was really intense, and it caused panic attacks and thoughts of, existential things. So that's when I first got it. And it was probably about a year into that, I kept Googling, and I was like feeling out of it and things like that. That was 2008. So I was just writing all these things into Google. And then those DP forums, I think it was at the time, were coming up. And I then started probably again a year in. I thought I was just mental for a year. Excuse my words. I would never use that word today. But at the time in 2008, I was like, nope, that's what's wrong with me. And what a horrible thing to say about yourself. But that's, again, where your head goes when you're feeling that out of it. So I was looking all this stuff up, and I was like, okay, I think I've got this thing called depersonalization. There was no help. And then I went to a therapist who was okay. He tried his best, and I did that for about a year. I didn't properly work on it though. So I didn't quit caffeine at all. I was still staying up really late at night, doing gigs, hanging out with bandmates, probably engaging in stupid behaviors. And I was doing all that kind of stuff, and I didn't really deal with the existential thoughts. So I was doing a lot of avoidance. So I kind of got rid of DPDR after 2 years. So I was about 20 when it went away, but I wouldn't look at the night sky. Or I just spent years being still kind of half afraid. And then, so maybe DPDR didn't fully go away. I felt like I sort of forgot about it though. And then it was 2020, it came back, and I knew exactly then. I was like, it's brain fog. But then a couple of weeks later, I was like, it's DPDR. And I got your book and really knuckled down into those thoughts and stopped avoiding things. And then I fully recovered. Like, I can look at the night sky now. I can, do all these things, but I also know that I have to also be a little bit careful of myself. Like, I am not going to smoke marijuana again. I am not going to go and get plastered all the time. Like, things like that, it's just not part of my lifestyle anymore. And I know that I'm, again, predisposition to feeling quite panicked. And I mean, I could put myself through that, and I probably would be able to just deal with the DPDR that came from it, but I don't really want to. I just want to feel healthy and happy, right? Like, so your book taught me all these habits that I actually kind of stayed on top of, and it turned into just my normal life, which is so cool. I still take magnesium because it was in your book, and at the time I was like, does this help? But it became something that helped my sleep amazingly. So it's just those little things you wrote about that, funnily enough, became the new habits that are still here now.
That's
and
so,
yeah, I
so
feel 100%. So
that's
yeah,
so great to hear. I'm delighted that the book was so helpful. And in terms of your recovery, Emma, can you tell us a bit more about just like because this is something that people ask you about all the time. What does recovery feel like? And just on a day, what's your recollection of that, kind of like as you moved from the DPDR state into a non-DPDR state?
yes. So it wasn't like the magic button, and thank God it wasn't, because if that had happened, I think that would also freak me out to go from one state to like
Right,
normal,
yeah.
right? Like I think that would have been bad as well. So it does just gradually go away. So I started off reading your book, and then I printed out the habit tracker. So I did that, and I printed out like four sheets. So I had like a month of it, and I would just follow it like religiously. I would stuff up sometimes, but that's okay. I'd just get back on the horse. I would listen to your meditation every single night, like no fail. That was massive for me in recovery. And again, stopped looking at all the forums, started exercising, quit caffeine. I was like huge into caffeine before that. Like I'm embarrassed to tell people how. Like I've come from an Irish family, so I was drinking like 8 cups of tea a day. Like, it was intense. So it's like I had to make a fair few lifestyle changes, but it goes away so gradually, and it just started to kind of fade. And I would have, yeah, like you say in the book, and it's so true, I would have 1 minute of recovery one day. And then the next day I might have 1.5 minutes. And then the next day, maybe none. And then the next day, it was like 2 minutes of recovery. So it kind of was this really gradual thing. And I'd say 3 months it took, where I was like forgetting about it for a good, I don't know, half of the day. And it would just fade and fade and fade. And I'd sort of half forget about it sometimes and sort of half be in it, if that makes sense. And then eventually you just genuinely stop caring about it. And your life just hits this normal stage, but it's sort of better than it was before because of the habits I'd, gotten myself into and all of those things. But it took so much work. Like, I'm never going to lie about that. Like, it was hard at first. I did not want to change my habits. Like, I didn't want to get out of bed and just jump out of the bed. I wanted to lay in bed, and sit there and be all like dreamy and whatever. But it wasn't beneficial for me because my mind was so obsessed with those DPDR thoughts. I had to just change my habits. So it's interesting, but it does, honestly, it does fade. I think that's the best description I have of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's like when I look back on my experience as well, for me, it was like the windows of time in which I wasn't thinking about DP and DR just got bigger and bigger. And also I when I lived my life as if I felt no anxiety, that kind of demonstrated to my brain that, well, the anxiety is pointless. Like there's no reason for it to be there. So if I want to go to the gym or the cinema and I feel some anxiety, I'm still going. I'm still going, like, you know. And a big thing for me as well was when I went back to college. So I went and did a master's degree that I'd been accepted for. And again, when I got that acceptance letter, I was just like, there's no way, like I can't do this. But I just pushed myself and I said, like, well, this the times when you feel better, even if they're short term, are when you are doing other things that you enjoy doing, when you're giving your brain tasks and objectives that are actually interesting and rewarding. So this is a big, interesting reward that you can go for. You might feel stressed out when you do it first, but you have to do it. Like you have to do it. And when I pushed myself to do that, that was a big sea change as well. But what I say to people as well is that, like, look, when you're recovered, like if you want to lie to stay in bed in the mornings, you can do it. I mean, I drink a lot. I drink a lot of coffee. A lot of coffee.
Amazing.
I love it. I love coffee. But while I was recovering, I did have to set those things aside. But I guess I had more and more days where I cared about it less, and then I just started to forget about it. And I would find that I was having days where at the end of the day, I would say to myself, oh, geez, I didn't think about it at all. And then I would say, now I'm thinking about it. So I take out the Nintendo and start playing something, or I read a book or watch it, you know. But it's something that you just kind of, it starts to just, you start to realize it's just in your rearview mirror. It's just, oh yeah, that thing that happened. And you're not kind of just arguing with it anymore, and you're not even really celebrating that it's gone. It's just it's just like a thing that happened, and it's, you know, and you maybe feel stronger for it, but the whole kind of narrative of like being frustrated or beating yourself up for smoking the weed when it happened, that's all gone. That's all gone. And yeah.
It just, everything goes to normal, and as it should. It's just, you know, you didn't have this your whole life. It just goes back to how you felt before, and things just align again, and it makes sense, and the anxiety has gone. I think that's the biggest part.
Absolutely. And there's, you know, something that people often ask me about is they say, well, I feel like the DPDR has like fundamentally changed me. So like my capacity to feel pleasure or to enjoy a movie, or I can't feel the connection that I had to my family that I used to have. So that circuit has been damaged and I can't access these things anymore. And what I would say to them is, well, that's not true. You couldn't do that if you wanted to. All of these abilities and capacities are absolutely there. They're absolutely intact. There's nothing wrong. It's just that at the moment, there's a little filter of anxiety that's sitting on top of them that just essentially is saying, like, are you sure you're not in danger? Like, are you sure that nothing's wrong? So when you try to kind of like watch a film, for example, and you keep getting distracted by that little alarm that's saying, okay, I know you're trying to watch a film, but are you sure you're not in danger? Like, are you sure nothing's wrong? It just it interrupts your focus on the film. That's all. And as your recovery continues, and those intrusive catastrophic thoughts fade away and your focus gets better, you can watch the film again. But you realize that this whole idea that there was somehow some kind of damage done to your ability to enjoy these things, what it wasn't an accurate description of anxiety. It was the anxiety. It was anxiety saying, oh, but what if you're permanently broken? What if you can never watch a movie again? No, it's anxiety. It's anxiety.
They often
Yeah.
start with like what if or I might. I've noticed there's like a little signal. If it's a what if thought, I'm like, is that anxiety? I give it like a second. I still get those thoughts sometimes. I'm just human. And it's like,
Mm.
what if, Emma? Or I might. Like it's interesting. Like it, and people go, I have no anxiety. I'm like, are you having those thoughts? And they're like, oh yeah. I'm like, that's anxiety, you know?
Yeah,
It's interesting.
absolutely.
So I think that's spot on.
Yeah. And the thing of saying I don't feel anxiety is and I absolutely went through this myself where I was
Yeah.
like, I think we talked about this earlier, but I was like, well, the anxiety's gone, but I still feel DP and DR. So what's going on? And the thing is that
Yeah.
like, so the anxiety wasn't gone, but the anxiety had vastly improved. So my reference point for anxiety was that like when it first started, like my life stopped and I was having multiple panic attacks a day. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep. I thought I was dying. I thought I was going crazy. I stopped working. Everything stopped. Right. So that's my reference point for anxiety, for like high anxiety.
Yeah.
And when I was recovering, and I was down to like maybe 3 or 4 out of 10 anxiety. So my life was back on track. I was back working. I was out of my parents' place. Things were good, and I wasn't having massive panic attacks, and that was behind me. But the mistake I made was thinking, well, the anxiety is gone. It was way better than 10 out of 10, and I was making huge progress, but it wasn't gone. I still had like 30% to go or 40% to go. But
Oh
this
yeah.
is
Yeah.
it's such a common thing that at each point in your recovery, you kind of look at it and say, oh, but something's wrong. This symptom is still there. The anxiety, why is the DP gone?
Yes.
Um, but it's actually a very positive thing because it demonstrates to you that you have been making loads of progress, but you just need to focus your attention on that progress rather than the anxiety that's left to get rid of, you know?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And anxiety is not always just heart palpitations and, shaking and sweating.
Yeah.
It's thoughts. Like it can be just ruminating, continuous, like these ones going, and you kind of got to turn it down like a radio. I always say, like it's like a static, and or it can also just be there. Like that's also fine. Like it's just thoughts, and thoughts cannot and have never killed any of us. It's thoughts are thoughts. They're just,
Yeah.
they're just there.
Yeah.
And that's
And
okay.
yeah, and there's this, and we do tend to get into this idea as well that like that anxiety is it's a group of thoughts that are either, or sorry, thoughts and feelings that are either all on or they're all off, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
like so you'll be recovering and you'll say something like, hang on, so I have the existential thoughts, but I am not having heart palpitations. What's wrong?
Mm-hmm.
Oh God, what's wrong? And then you go on the forums, you start researching it.
Oh yeah,
But
I
it's
did that.
this
Yes.
yeah, me too. But just
Oh,
a massive overcomplication of like what's essentially, it's like it's a spectrum of symptoms. Like of course they're not going to all like switch on and off like based on anxiety. They're going to they're going they change over time. Some go up, some go down, and as we said earlier, the symptoms that you focus on will feel more intense because you're focusing on them. um
yeah.
but we do get into these kind of like um big overcomplications of like analyzing the anxiety during the recovery process.
Oh yeah.
If you're feeling some existential thoughts, but you're not, but your heart isn't beating too quickly, but you're sweating a bit and your left shoulder feels a bit tense,
Ah,
that's okay.
yes.
That's okay. You don't need to put those into Reddit
Yeah.
to see if
Oh,
that's,
totally. Yeah.
yeah.
Yes, I know it's hard, and I get how hard it is. And like honestly, again, I'm still a bit of an anxious person. I'm okay to admit that. Like I have no issue. I think it's nice to know that there's other people out there who have that still. But I would still, if I get a pain in my head, I'm like, is it a brain tumor? But like I know, you know, I know that it doesn't help. And again, it's that reassurance seeking to go and do those safety behaviors. And I know it's not helpful. So It's seeing those links and being like, no, I'm going to be okay and I can get through this. And you absolutely can. Like, DPDR has never hurt anybody ever. Like, it's just not even dangerous. And I think that is why doctors don't probably talk about it a lot, and it doesn't have as much research put behind it. I wish it did, but I think it is because they do recognize it as being kind of harmless in a good way. Like, I hope that I'm not saying anything that makes people feel like they're not being validated, because it's terrifying. But on a nice level, I think again, they don't think of it as being life-threatening enough to put tons of info out there on it.
Yeah, it is one of the kind of both affirming and frustrating aspects of the condition, is that for a great amount of people who go and speak to their doctors, that the doctors will, and my doctor said this to me, he said, sounds like anxiety. And I was just going like, this isn't anxiety. Like, I mean, I even feel like I'm not here. Like, I can't recognize myself in the mirror. Like, that's not anxiety. But the thing is that it was anxiety, and he was correct. Like, he was 100% correct. But I needed more information than that. And because in my heart of hearts, I was thinking like, he doesn't understand this, like, you know. So I think that is a big point of frustration, is that like, it is technically correct, and it can give you the kind of foundation for moving forward, but it's just the tip of the iceberg, and people kind of need more information. You know, again, like I say to people sometimes, you know, imagine you had a panic attack and you developed claustrophobia out of nowhere, and all of a sudden, as we were talking about earlier, so you can't get on the subway, you get into your car, it causes a panic attack, you get into the elevator at work and you start crying, you know, this type of stuff. Now, imagine that you've never heard the word claustrophobia, and then you go to your doctor, and then the doctor says, that sounds like anxiety, and they don't mention the word claustrophobia. Now, technically they're correct, but like, in your heart, you're saying like, this isn't anxiety. Like, I can't get into my car. Like, anxiety is what I feel when I have a job interview. Like, it's not crying on the elevator. This is different, you know. So the core of the information is there, but there's just not enough awareness of it yet. But and this is kind of something I know I mentioned earlier, Emma, but like, it's definitely changing. It is definitely changing, and there's more awareness about it. Even like, you know, Joe Rogan interviewed Post Malone, the rapper. Jesus, I'm very old. He interviewed him a couple of weeks ago, but Post Malone has spoken about the fact that he has depersonalization disorder, and has had it since he had a horrendous weed experience years and years ago. But they talked about it, you know, in Bo Burnham's Netflix special Inside, which came out during Netflix. Well, on Netflix during COVID.
Yes, I knew what you meant. Yes.
Yeah. That's too much coffee now, like, you know. But he mentions derealization in it. There's one of the comedians on Saturday Night Live has recently taken a break from the show, I believe, or from performing, because of depersonalization disorder. So it's getting, like, it's being mentioned in the news, and it's being spoken about much more consistently. And I think that is kind of like, when it becomes, awareness of it happens in culture, that kind of like trickles down into people's awareness, and also people being aware of it and then telling their doctor about it, you know, and bringing in resources, like the British Medical Journal have like a PDF that you can print out, that you can bring into your doctor, and you know,
right.
So the awareness of it is definitely changing. But I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that, Emma, particularly from your perspective as a medical health professional, you know.
Yeah, so I think it depends. I think you're spot on. It's definitely getting more airtime, and I think that's brilliant. So my partner, and he's a clinical psychologist, and he's at our clinic as well, is doing his PhD at the moment on DPDR, because I had it, which is That's kind of sweet. But it's kind of interesting just seeing even the research he's doing and now connecting with other researchers. Like if he had done this PhD 10 years ago, we both recognize that there wouldn't have been anywhere near the amount of people researching it. So that's brilliant. Like there is definitely, I agree completely. There is definitely more and more happening, but I think there could be also more. So that's my little thing. And I think that's why I jumped at doing this interview, is because the more we can talk about DPDR and get the word out there, honestly, the better. Because I think it's one of the things that a lot of people have experienced it, but haven't even recognized they've had it. So they don't even think about it that they've even had it. They've just had the experience and it hasn't even properly registered in their brains. And then they're hearing about this and going, well, that's weird. And a lot of our parents, for instance, like clients I meet, my parents, they don't really understand. They're like, oh, okay, are you okay? Like, just have a lie down, Emma. You'll be right, you know? And I'm like, that's not quite it. So again, it is hard to describe it to people who haven't had it, like as in a disorder of it. I think they think, oh, I've had it for 2 seconds, like it just goes away, don't worry about it.
Yeah.
So it's, again, it is a really tricky one. I think most people can connect with depression a little bit easier because, you know, we've all really felt that deep sadness at some point for some reason. So the awareness is a bit more difficult to conjure up, I think, for depersonalization, but it's happening, and I'm so glad. So yeah, in the clinic, I'm seeing more and more people just being positive around depersonalization and knowing what it is a lot quicker. Because I think it's been around a long time, by the way. Like I'm sure our grandparents' era and all of that were probably going through certain aspects of depersonalization, and I have a gut feeling that they used to call it a nervous breakdown. Now that's come from the Dr. Claire Weekes book, and I'm sure a lot of people have read Complete Self-Help for Your Nerves, but she describes the nervous breakdown and it just sounds so akin to depersonalization. Like it's got to be what she's partially talking about, the, you know, you can't work, you can't eat, you can't sleep, you feel like you're going mad, all these things. So I think DPDR has been around for, you know, since Adam was in shorts, but we're kind of, you know, just really like nailing what it is now and understanding it. And it couldn't be a bad thing.
Absolutely. And and I think that, you know, because of the nature of it, and it feels so difficult to describe, and we really try to come at it from different angles to try and verbalize the experience. I mean, I remember saying things like, I feel like my memory is fragmenting. I remember saying that at one point.
Yes.
And because people try to explain it in such varied terms, and also because people will often refrain from explaining it because they're afraid they're going crazy, or because they're afraid that, like, you know, I mean, when I remember like talking to my doctor and saying like, I feel like I'm not here, and I was just thinking like, that's it, Sean, like there's going to be a van wait, there's going to be a van waiting outside for you, like, you know, I mean, I was like, this is the start of, like, you know, like forget about your life, like, because this is what you're doing now, and he's going to say, well, you're finished, you know. And I was afraid to say it, but because it can be such a difficult, the symptoms can be difficult to verbalize, and people are often reluctant to verbalize them anyway because of the fear of being labeled as crazy. That prevents it from being diagnosed as quickly as something like claustrophobia, which as frightening as the symptoms are, they can be quite specific and environmentally specific, and therefore more easily identifiable than someone just trying to describe a feeling of disconnection, or someone saying like, I feel like my vision is 2D. You know, well, is that a visual problem? Is that, I mean, you know, and I thought that it might be a visual problem. I'm having these horrible existential thoughts. Well, is that an existential crisis? You know, there's all these different kind of interpretations.
Oh, there's some bad ones out there too, by the way. I remember telling a friend and she's like, Emma, I think you've had an ego death. And I was like, what the fuck? Like, oh, excuse me. But I was like, oh my goodness, like that doesn't help. Like, I'm like, I don't want to have an ego death. Like, and then that caused me
Yeah.
anxiety going, am I having an ego death? And then Googling what's an ego death. And it just, yeah, like it's interesting. It does conjure up all these different thoughts from people and different ideas. And it's
Uh,
wild, but we're getting somewhere with it.
yeah. I mean, I at one point was absolutely sure. I mean, the stuff you mentioned earlier, I thought I was like maybe I had died in a car crash that I couldn't remember. I
I thought
thought
that
that,
too.
yeah, I thought I was either in heaven or in hell or maybe purgatory. Um,
What's that?
I
Is that medium help? What's purgatory?
so purgatory is it's an idea from actually it's in Catholicism, but I think it's from kind of Christianity where or early Christianity, and the idea is that it's the state between death and the afterlife in which your sins
Oh.
get purged, or you
Oh,
account or atone for your sins.
oh.
Um, yeah. I mean,
Okay, yeah, that's terrifying.
yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
it's not helpful,
And
is it?
no, 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 no. But also I thought. I mean, I also thought that I had like suddenly become enlightened, but I didn't want it to happen. So so I was researching all about like enlightenment, and I had been meditating before that. Still meditate, but like I thought that had something to do with it. And and part of part of DPDR, especially, and any anxiety-based condition to some degree, I'm sure, is that there's this idea. I talk about this in the book, and it's called oh God, it's the idea that we tend to ascribe large descriptions or explanations onto experiences that feel large. And it's called proportionality bias. That's what it's called, right? So when we go through something like DP and DR, and like your whole life just like stops, you think you're going crazy, you think you're going to die, you can't hear your voice without freaking out anymore, your parent, your family, your everyone, nothing feels real anymore. And so what we tend to do psychologically is put a huge explanation onto that because
Yes.
that feels more apt. It feels more right for the experience. So when somebody tells you like, well, what you're going through is anxiety, that feels like that, but that can't be right. Like this isn't anxiety. Like
Yeah.
as I mentioned earlier, like my whole life has changed. Like this isn't anxiety. And so for me, hearing something like, oh, well, maybe you're in purgatory, or um, uh, maybe this is some sort of inverted enlightenment, like those explanations felt like they were more fitting with the scale of what I was experiencing, because
Yeah.
anxiety did not fit the scale of what I was experiencing. And
Yeah.
but but as I recovered, I realized that like that those large explanations, we want narratives that make sense, but a good
Oh, yeah.
but part of recovery is just kind of taking that scaffolding off of it and using Occam's razor, which says all things being equal, the simplest explanation is the most likely, and the simplest explanation is this: yeah, it's probably not purgatory. Like
Yeah, it's
it's
probably
probably
not.
a
Yeah.
it's probably the panic attack you had when you smoked that joint in Amsterdam. you know.
Most likely. Yep. I know it's hard, and I get it. I totally did those things as well.
Mm,
And it's interesting, and we do come out the other side though. That's the thing. It
mm.
feels that, it feels insurmountable, but it's not. Like you climb the mountain, you come down, and I think recovery is like that.
Yeah.
It's up and down and side to side and all of those things, but it does happen. And I don't know about you, but I used to put a date on my recovery. So I was like, okay, so it's whatever, it's April the 5th and I have not recovered yet, so that means I'm not going to recover.
Yeah.
Whoa, that was. And then I'd go, oh, it's April 5th and I've only half recovered. Like I'd have all these funny little days and dates, but once I let go of all of that as well, it just all made more sense and got easier, and I just forgot about it more and more.
Yeah, certainly. And I did absolutely did that with the dates as well. And again, it's one of these kind of tactics that feels ostensibly like it's a good approach because it feels like what I'm giving structure to my recovery. I've got goals, I've got dates,
Yeah.
But what you're actually doing is you are telling your brain that this is so important that you need to put a date on it. And actually what it's like doing is it's like saying, I've had this song stuck in my head for a few days now, but it has to be gone by Tuesday at 4 o'clock because I've got a meeting, right? It has to be gone by then. So I'm going to make sure that it's gone by then. So I'm going to check in on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday at 4 o'clock each day. And it's like, and you've got the best of intentions in doing that. And it feels like the right thing to do. But all you're doing is just reminding yourself over and over again that this is supposed to be an issue and you're supposed to check in on it. What I often say to people is like, what you're aiming for with recovery is that this has nothing to do with you anymore. Not positive, not negative. This is a thing that happened in the past. It has nothing to do with you anymore because you're not in danger. You don't need to have this alarm system going off. So when you say to yourself, well, I'm going to aim to have this completely gone in like 3 weeks time. Well, why would you put a time limit on something that has nothing to do with you anymore? And that's not to say that like the 3 weeks is like completely unrealistic or anything, but don't put that time limit on it because you're inadvertently going to be checking in on yourself over and over and over and over again. Something I meant to say as well, Emma, was I did an interview last week, and it'll be on YouTube by the time that this goes out, and I think you'll find it extremely interesting. And it's with a clinical psychologist. I hope I'm getting that correct. Yeah, clinical psychologist in Brazil who developed DPDR after a bad weed experience while he was doing his undergrad studies, and then subsequently did his undergrad thesis on depersonalization research and is currently doing his master's degree in depersonalization research as well, but is working in a clinic working with people in Brazil who have DPDR. And he's a fascinating guy, absolutely lovely guy as well, named Lucas. And when he was doing his doing his undergrad thesis, he needed to find people who had either had DPDR or experienced it in kind of brief stints. And he found people working locally in the university and spoke to them. And also he found people online on Reddit, and he got them into a WhatsApp group, and he did the research that way by speaking to them, and just kind of did just a kind of couple of, I guess, surveys and things like that. But he was able to do like medical research on depersonalization and derealization using the internet and WhatsApp, and will now be building on that work and research going forward in his career. And I just thought it was so amazing and inspirational that, like, again, for somebody who has gone through it themselves, and who like the fact that it's so difficult to kind of like locate large groups of people who've had this, and he's now to physically do it, and he's bypassing that obstacle by using the internet and Reddit and WhatsApp to research that way. So there's another, and just like with you too, Emma, like, I mean, there's a generation of therapists and medical professionals who are coming through now, who understand the condition, who have maybe gone through it themselves. So I can only imagine what things are going to be like in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time, when the ease of access to help with this and the recognition of it will be so different.
Amazing. And honestly, I feel like this is a perfect time to say, Sean, you were a big part of this. I feel like there was no research when I had this in 2008. Like I was just alone, like didn't know what to do, and then getting it again. And then you're like, honestly, like you probably started a lot of this, if I'm completely honest, and helped so many of us. And now this is your product. This is what's happening. And we're all, you know, coming off of your book and finding help and then wanting to help other people. So I feel like, again, this is huge. Like you've done something so special for so many of us, and I hope that's been said in an interview before, because it's the absolute truth. And you know, this has changed people's lives. Like it's massive. And yeah, it and I think when we've been through something like this, we just give and give to others, and we don't really think about how we have helped people, because you just want to keep helping and you don't even, you know, but you have done something so special. And I think you have a lot of credit to take for all of that as well.
That's so kind of you to say, Emma. I really appreciate that. Well, as I've said in some other interviews as well, like, I mean, really, I mean, if you told me when I was 25, like, or 24, you'll write a self-help book and you'll be like coaching people with this condition, like I would have just like spat out my coffee. You know,
Yeah,
I was like, no,
totally.
I'm a filmmaker. I'm going to work in film. That's what I'm doing. Um,
Yes.
but then when it happened, and I guess like one of the reasons I wrote the book was really just out of a sense of frustration that there wasn't more information there. And it wasn't even that. It was like that. It was like all the information was there, like it's all there, but
Yeah.
I had to wade through so much different kind of contradictory stuff and kind of white noise in order to get that information. So I felt like it made sense to just take what I had learned and take with the process that I kind of used in my recovery and just put that into, at the time it was like just like a short little PDF document, and since then it's kind of grown to what it is today. But the fact that
Amazing.
like it's still helping people, and you know is a resource that you use in your own therapy is
Every
just
day.
is wonderful. It's so
Yeah.
wonderful.
And that's the thing too, just quickly, that you're like, you've done that as well, but you're also a filmmaker and an award-winning filmmaker. Like it shows that you can have DPDR, but you can go on to do all these. I think you're like the living proof of all of those things. You can still talk about it and help people, but live an amazing life. Like it's so cool, so inspirational.
Oh, thank you so much. And like the like themes of mental health have definitely been present in my film work, and I really think that like the my creative work has benefited from that, from having gone through that stuff in the past. And I can communicate that through the creative work, which brings me to your creative work, Emma.
Ah,
So
yeah.
tell us about your music. You're quite prolific with your output there.
Yeah, well, I do all sorts of music. So I grew up being a violin player, and then I ended up singing, and I ended up in a metal band, which is kind of random, I know, but it was very cool and happened very organically. And again, it was one of those things that came out of my experience, the metal band with DPDR. And it was one of those flow state activities, funnily enough, that I started doing. And I ended up writing songs about my experiences with anxiety and DPDR and all these different themes. And I've just connected even in that way with people through, you know, again, sharing that song and other people going, oh, yeah, like I've experienced that and I've gone through that. And it's kind of amazing seeing the art being a medium for helping people as well with their mental health, and then getting to share my other side, which is like the therapy side of me. So it's all kind of come together. And again, I had that moment where I had DPDR really bad and I was like, I'll never play music again. Like I'm screwed, like I'm finished. But it does come back, and you can have a completely cool life. Like, you know, I've luckily enough got to play festivals, and we recently, you know, won an award and did all these cool things. And again, it was those things that I was like, I just signed myself out of completely when I had DPDR. and it is possible to go and achieve your dreams, whatever it is, and so I've been lucky in that sense, and again, maybe kind of followed a few of your footsteps with that, and it's really been awesome. So yeah, you're very inspirational. I have clients that say the same thing, by the way. They're like, I've heard Sean's book and I've seen what he was doing and it helped me. So yeah.
Oh, that's
it
so good to hear. What do you I know you sing in the band. Do you play as well?
Yeah, I play. So I write the songs and I play violin and do a few things. So it's the Atomic Bow project that we are on Spotify, and got a new song coming out. Oh, I feel like I'm in a different interview now. I feel like I'm in one of our
yeah
band interviews.
Now it's the metal,
yeah,
now it's the metal band interview, okay?
yes. No. But I love it. And again, like creativity, flow state activity, it's so interesting. Like no one could say it didn't connect. It all connects, and it's all interesting. And I wrote a song called Fall to the Beast. And that song is a metaphor for DPDR and anxiety and letting the beast be there, and or just letting it fall, and letting myself fall to the anxiety and just succumbing to it all, I guess.
Yeah.
And that song's specifically about depersonalization and my experience, and I wrote it while I was recovering.
Fantastic. And you're absolutely right. It's so healthy to take these experiences and then like kind of channel them creatively, because it helps to process them as well, And I wrote and directed a short film called Disappear, which is about it's about a guy who is suffering with chronic anxiety, who gets it into his head that he might just disappear. He might just like literally just like wink off the face of the earth, like, and the argument, and he kind of gets in, not an argument, but kind of debate with his psychologist about it. And again, I made it just as a kind of way of, I guess, kind of creatively, like just kind of putting a full stop under the experience and just saying, okay, well, what better way to deal with something that I thought was like that had like stopped me making films forever? What better way to deal with it than to make a film about it? That's what I'll do. But what's been really interesting though is that, like, I mean, that because I had that thought like very, very consistently. What I had DPDR was that, well, like, what if I could just like think myself out of existence? If I could like erode my own being by thinking about it, like, and it was so frightening. It was so frightening. But what's been really interesting is that when I'm speaking to people, or people like comment on YouTube or whatever, and they say, oh, I feel like I'm going to disappear. And I can say like, I felt that too. And they go, do they? And did you? I'm like, yeah, I made a short film about it,
Wow.
like,
yeah.
It's that common. It feels so weird and so bizarre and outlandish, and it's like I'm in a sci-fi. No, and it's like, no. This is like an extremely common symptom. And here's a little thing I wrote and directed about it. People go, oh, wow, this is much more common than I thought, like, and it tends to give people a sense of ease with it, and it certainly did for me at the time.
It's amazing. I think, yeah, it's beautiful, and it's lovely that we're at that stage of the DPDR where it's not even there, and you can look back on it and see that. So I think hopefully, if anyone's watching, it gives them that hope that it's completely possible, and you can talk about it after, and you can, I thought I would never be able to. I was like, oh, I'm never going to be able to speak about this again. And the first time I had DPDR, I didn't, and I was all like nervy, and that's why I think I didn't recover. I was still really stuck in that fear, but now it doesn't do anything. I just don't even care, like, which is cool.
It's great, yeah, and it demonstrates that, like, that there is nothing inherently frightening about DPDR or even anxiety. There's nothing about it that you need to kind of like push to the side or be afraid of, because in and of itself, again, like if you experienced this while you were jet lagged, you wouldn't think twice about it,
Yep.
If you were meditating for an hour and you felt a bit kind of spacey afterwards, like you wouldn't think about it. You'd just be like, well, that's it might even be pleasant, like, um and as we recover and we kind of understand why these symptoms happened, why the condition happened, and there's the phrase that says anxiety is caused by the fear of anxiety and depersonalization is caused by the fear of depersonalization. And when you understand it, the fear is kind of taken out of it, and you just kind of and you look at depersonalization in the same way that you would look at shoulder tension or sweating or
Yes.
heart palpitations, and just be like, God, yeah, it's not the most pleasant thing when it happened, but like I was never in danger. It was never going to hurt me. Not only was this not going to hurt me, but this was literally part of my brain's defensive mechanism. It was just happening at the wrong time. And so, and people ask me this is like quite often as well, Emma, as they say, but like, how are you able to talk about it without it like not like setting you off or freaking me out? And it's like, well, because there's nothing to set me off. There's nothing to freak out about. I find it absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, me
It's
too.
so interesting.
I know. I agree so much. It doesn't even like it's like water off a duck's back now. It just doesn't mean anything. Even if I have a thought around it, I'm like, oh yeah, I thought weird. And I kind of do the so what, like, and that's the fact of it. Like, so what? All thoughts are so what unless they align with our values.
Yeah.
Really, that's kind of how I live my life now. It's any thought, if it doesn't align with what I'm doing and my values, it's a so what thought.
Yeah.
And like again, they'll be most of our thoughts. Really, like we're just humans, like they're just weird thoughts, and we're just constantly on these little, tangents of keeping ourselves safe, but there's nothing to worry about. And I kind of use that for all the other anxiety things I was going through, and my ADHD is that can conjure up some whack thoughts, right? Like all sorts of things. And I don't know about you, but I had intrusive thoughts about themes even like that would scare me but weren't connected exactly with DPDR. So I don't know. I had ones like I had to hide knives in the house for a while I had DPDR. I had no intention of, harming. I had this fear. I was like, if someone comes in the house, I'm going to stab them. Like I am the least person who is going to stab somebody, right? And it was just this, and I literally locked them up in a cupboard. And it's so funny. It was just intrusive thoughts, no different from ones about existence or ones about health anxiety or whatever. Like they all get treated the same now. So what?
Yeah,
They're
absolutely.
meaning.
And one of my biggest intrusive thoughts was I couldn't drive my car. I was
Oh,
like,
I had that for a while.
yeah, I was thinking if I get into the car, I will absolutely lose control of myself, of my limbs, of the car, and I will crash it into a crowd of people, and I'll die, and they'll die. I was so terrified of this happening. I was just like, I just can't trust myself to do this. I was so frightened of it. If I saw like a picture of a car, if I saw like someone driving on the television, that would freak me out. Like everything about that freaked me out. And and a good example I like to use when I'm speaking to people about this is, well, like I can talk about that now and it doesn't bother me in the least. Back in the day, like if somebody mentioned the car to me or said like we need to drive somewhere, I would have a meltdown. Like I would just start, well, geez, but what if something happens? What if, I can't be, all this stuff. And I would just have to, and that would be me for the day. I'd be finished. Right. And now it doesn't bother me at all. And I've been driving a lot since.
Yeah.
But what has changed in that time between when I literally couldn't hear somebody say the word drive the car, and now where it doesn't bother me at all? Has my brain changed? No, I'm exactly the same. Like I'm the same person. Have the words changed? No, the words themselves haven't changed. What has changed is that at the time, my levels of anxiety were way higher than they should have been. And so I was constantly on the lookout for like catastrophic hypothetical situations. And as I recovered, the anxiety faded away and stopped. And the hyper awareness of those hypothetical situations also faded away and stopped. So I was able to just get into my car and drive when I wanted to. But the thought itself of potentially driving the car in itself is not frightening. It's the anxiety that we hook onto it and associate it with it. That's what causes the fear to happen. And the same thing goes for all of the discussions about anxiety and DP. The reason we can talk about it now and it doesn't bother us in the least is not because the thoughts have changed or the words have changed. It's just because we're not looking at it through a filter of anxiety. And also, like, if you couldn't look at your dog, if we couldn't look at our dogs without having a panic attack, like, or freaking out, like that, what that demonstrates to you is that there is no logical underpinning to these things. There's no reason to be the same reason. There's no reason to be afraid of getting into the car is the same reason there's no reason to be afraid of the dog. There's no logical throughput, but what is connecting them is just anxiety. That's all. That's all.
Yep, I agree completely. It's so interesting, and brains are weird, and I think we don't know a lot about brains. Nobody does, but there is definitely anxiety, and you can just see it plain as day with these kinds of conditions and these types of thoughts. It's the what ifs, the I mights, the all those. I just lump them into the same category now. They could all stay in that little basket, and you start to learn to deal with them. And DPDR taught me that massively. So it was weirdly positive, but I know when you say that, it is just so cliche and annoying almost, but it was the truth. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is. I mean, it's definitely, but I mean, I like looking at all the interviews I've done with folks and stuff. And I mean, invariably people say I was stronger afterwards, and just I'm kind of glad I went through it and kind of got out of the way, and I feel more empathetic with people, and all that good stuff. So Emma, I got one more question for you. So there's going to be people watching this who maybe are in the same place that you were when this first started. If you had some advice for yourself back in the day, or advice for people who are going through today what you were going through back in the day, what would that be?
Definitely read the manual. Start there. If you haven't got it already, I know it does sound like a little bit of an ad, but I'm going to go there because it's the truth. Read the manual. It honestly helps so much. It normalized so many things that I was freaking out about and worried about, and use the habit tracker. That is massive. If you get it, just use it. The biggest things for me was not looking it up anymore. Stop Googling it, stop going on Reddit, stop the forums, stop any of it. Make a new TikTok account if you're getting suggestions. Like, you got to be really hardcore with yourself, and each day tick off, I didn't look at social media around DPDR. That was huge. So that one, exercising every day, massive. Lowering caffeine, no drugs, none of that stuff. Alcohol, if you can avoid it. Nicotine, avoid it. All of those things. Stop talking about it. Stop reassurance seeking with your partners, your parents, whoever online. That's just no go. The other things is looking at thoughts and just going, I don't need that, and distracting yourself, but repeating it, because they will come back. Like, it's like a little bully on your shoulder going, nee, and I would go and distract myself, and then the thought would come back. So that means you have to distract yourself again, and your brain begins to make a new neural pathway, because at the moment it's in one to just go DPDR. You need to make a new roundabout up here and keep distracting, re-engaging, going into things. And then if the thoughts were keeping on going, I'd do the so what? Oh, well, I might just have the DPDR right now, and that's also okay. So stop fighting it. Those would be the main things I would do if I was right at the beginning of my journey again. I don't know if I've missed anything, but I think having active relaxation activities ready as well would be something I would do. So things like yoga, or listening to a meditation, or doing things that brought the anxiety down, because generally the anxiety comes down and then DPDR just comes down with it. So having all those things ready would be my main things I'd do again. Yeah.
Super. That's great advice. Emma, it has been so lovely speaking with you. Thank you so much for sharing your insight and advice. It heartens me to see that there are people like yourself who, having had personal experience with the condition, are now working with people with the condition, because it makes the recovery process, I can imagine, makes the recovery process so much easier. But thank you for taking the time to share your insight with us. And I know there's going to be people watching the channel who find this extremely helpful. Thank you so much for being with us today. It's been a pleasure speaking with you, and keep up the good work, okay?
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me, Sean.
Thanks, Emma. Take care.